Okay, well, we are at 12:01, so I'm going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. I think we'll have more folks join us as time goes on. So I will be recording this session today, just to let you know. So we will have that available later on if you would like to come back and refer to it. And I do appreciate you joining me today. So for all the folks that registered, I will be sending out the slides from today, as well as handouts and recipes that I'll be referring to throughout the presentation. So expect to see an email from me, and that should be within the next day or so. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. What I'd like to do during the presentation is to hold questions audibly if you can. Go ahead and put them in the chat box, and then at the end, I will address things and we'll have some times for Q&A. The presentation will only be about 45 minutes, so we should have a little bit of extra time. But thank you for joining. My name is Amber Webb. I am the Family Consumer Sciences Extension Agent with Larimer County. My background is nutrition and food science, and my specialty is food preservation. So we're right in the middle of a wonderful harvest season, and I would love to encourage you all to check out our farmers market. If you've not been there, the Larimer County Farmers Market, we've got some really beautiful produce. And it's perfect time to do something like pickling. So we will just go ahead and get started. I actually taught this class last night on campus, not on campus, on our campus on Blue Spruce Drive, and we had a wonderful time and pickled some asparagus. So I wish you all were able to join us for that. But I will be sending along that pickled asparagus recipe that we used. So what we're going to be talking about today is a variety of different kinds of pickles. But I wanted to start by just saying that pickling really is just increasing the acidity of a product to inhibit unsafe organisms from growing. So you can do that in a few ways. You can do this by adding an acid ingredient, such as vinegar or lemon juice, or you can increase it by using a specific thing like citric acid. So I will get into that a little bit later, but that's really the basic definition. I do want to mention that vinegar must be 5% acidity, and that you're not using any less water than you're using vinegar. So you need equal parts vinegar, equal parts water to have a safe pickled product. Okay. Now, many fermented foods start with a brine. So not all pickles are fermented. It's a kind of an interesting situation. So I'll talk through this a little bit more. So you can make pickles by pouring hot vinegar over vegetables, and that's a pickle. And those are called quick pickles. But you can also ferment vegetables, and those are also considered pickles, but you are preserving them in a different way. You're preserving them by fermentation, not by adding acid to it. Okay. So there's a couple different types that I just want to quickly mention before we jump into the others. So cucumbers and cabbage are fermented by lactic acid producing bacteria that are naturally present. So all vegetables, when they're grown, have some bacteria on them. We want to wash off the bad bacteria, but then when we introduce salt, we are allowing the good bacteria to grow, the bacteria that makes a fermented product so delicious, okay? And that is the lactic acid. So when you are fermenting a product, it can take a couple of weeks to do so. You are changing the pH of it. You're really changing the composition of it to create that really delicious flavor. When you create a fermented pickle, whether that's a cucumber or fermented cabbage, so which is sauerkraut, you can can those for long-term storage by water bath canning. You can also store them in the refrigerator, and that can be safe to have in your refrigerator for 4 to 6 months. And the longer that they're in your refrigerator, the more the flavor will develop and mellow, and it's just so delicious. So I have an entire another presentation specifically on fermentation next month. So if you're interested in the details of that, I'd love to have you join me for that. But today we're just going to focus on non-fermented pickles. Okay. Now there's a few different kinds within this category. So you will also see recipes in addition to like the classic cucumber pickle, you'll see things like relishes and salsas. So they're made from chopped fruits, chopped vegetables. They have a lot of wonderful seasonings in those recipes. You cook those in a spicy vinegar solution, and then you can water bath can those, or you can eat those fresh, right? So pickled fruits are also something that are very interesting within this category. If you've never tried something like a pickled peach, I would highly recommend it. I would highly recommend trying to can something like this. I had one a few months ago from a commercial brand, and it was a spicy peach pickle that had jalapenos in with it, and it was just fantastic. And they were half peaches, so they were very large chunks. So if you've never thought about something like that, maybe consider looking into that. So you'll see it'll be like a sweet and a sour syrup, and you might even see something like spices as well. Now, the focus that I'll be talking about today really will be the fresh pack, quick process pickled vegetables. It's one of the easiest ways that you can prepare pickles, aside from that fermented category that I was just talking about before, where you soak them in a brine and in a crock for a period of time for fermentation. We're not fermenting these pickles. The ones I'm talking about will just be for water bath canning today, okay? So what you're going to be using is vinegar, and that again acts as that preservative by lowering the pH to below 4.6. We don't recommend that you use homemade vinegar, or that you decrease that concentration of vinegar called for in the recipe, because that will run you into food safety issues. Now, there are different types of recipes out there for different types of pickled vegetables, and some of those do cater to dietary needs like lower salt or lower sugar, because some of these recipes can have quite a bit of them. The thing about that is, I just want to mention, with recipes that are tested through university testing or USDA testing, they've been tested for pH, they've been tested for a number of food safety recommendations. And when you look at a recipe and you really like it and you want to change it, we just don't recommend changing certain things like the vinegar or the salt or the sugar because it's not been research tested. And so you will have some food safety issues. So we always recommend, if you look at a recipe and you want to have something different, find a research tested recipe that's catered specifically for what you're looking for. So something like low salt or something like low sugar, okay? Especially with pickles, because you can really get a large difference in the quality of the final product if you make adjustments outside of what the recipe calls for, okay? Now, there's also a really wonderful way of pickling vegetables that you can use, and that's just refrigerator pickles. And these pickles aren't processed in a boiling water bath. You just make them and put them in your refrigerator, and they're good for about 3 weeks or so. It is important that you, again, follow that vinegar ratio of equal parts vinegar to equal parts water, so that you are inhibiting any kind of pathogenic bacteria from growing and anything that could possibly make you sick, okay? Now, I know that there are so many popular quick pickled recipes out there. I see them all the time. People that I really like to follow, and chefs that I like and trust. And those vinegar ratios are usually never equal parts. So just keep that in mind. Upping the vinegar a little bit to make that equal is going to give you a safe product, and it's not necessarily going to affect the flavor too much that it would maybe knock off the recipe to something that would be not from the original intention. Okay, so there's a little bit of flexibility, but that vinegar is one that we just don't recommend that you change. Okay, so I'll be hammering this into you today. So hopefully that's one thing you'll really come away with. Now, a quick pickle vegetable is super simple, and I have a really great handout that I'll be including for you today, but I've condensed it here for you. Think about something that a vegetable that you have in your refrigerator right now. Maybe it's some bell peppers or carrots or cucumbers or cauliflower. There's any variety of vegetables that are perfect for this kind of a process. So what you need to do is the recipe and the ratios that I have are for 1 quart jar. So that is 2 pints, and there's 16 ounces in a pint. So 1 full quart jar. So all you need to do is wash and prepare your vegetables in even size. You don't want super small cuts and then super large cuts. And then you selected measure seasonings, and I have that on the next slide. You pack the jars with your vegetables and with your seasonings. And then on the side, you make a brine with your vinegar, salt, and sugar. Once that brine is fully dissolved, you pour that in the jar over your vegetables up to the 1-inch line, or where the shoulder is on the jar. And then you let that cool. Once that's cooled, you can refrigerate that, and then it's available to eat within, right away. But we recommend giving it about a day or so, and then storing that in your refrigerator up to about 3 weeks. Okay. So the next slide is a table of those different kinds of brines that I was mentioning. So we've got here a really great classic brine that is for sour, so a little bit less sugar in it. And then a sweet brine that has a little bit more sugar for something more maybe like along the lines of a bread and butter pickle. And then I also have on here a table of recommended herbs and spices. You can also buy something like a pickling spice in a jar that's already measured out for you. It's got all the ingredients in there for a classic pickle. But if you're not interested in that and you want to use something you already have on hand, here's some really great options for you. I love including fresh spices, or fresh herbs, because they provide a lot of beautiful color, but also spices. So you've got dry and you've got fresh here. You can see with the dry spices, all of those are in the whole form. You can use ground spices, but the one thing that I do want to mention with that is that those will often cloud the vinegar, the brine solution, and it will make it kind of cloudy. So something like ground turmeric is going to probably turn the entire jar of pickles that orange color. If you don't mind that, that's perfectly fine, but just be aware that the ground spices will do that. And then the fresh herbs will most likely discolor as well. So if you're looking for something very bright and vibrant, dry spices really are going to be the best way to go. But experiment. There's so many different varieties that you could make, and it's so much fun to have your own special house recipe. So when you are making pickles, so this is back to the canned version, it is important that you process your pickles in a boiling water bath canner to prevent spoilage from bacteria, from yeast and molds, and to be shelf stable. So again, the acidity of the brine must not be altered so that you have that shelf stable quality, and that it's food safe for you to eat. Okay. And then another step in the boiling water bath process that's important to understand is that you're stopping the activity of things that are going to affect the flavor, the color, and the texture of your pickled vegetable. So it's really kind of suspending it in time when you boil with a water bath canner. Now, I mentioned that it's really important to have research tested recipes for food preservation and for pickling, especially because so many things can go wrong with pickles. And so having that good, informative resource is really essential. It's the essential place to start. So I've got several resources here for you. Colorado State University Extension has some great pickle recipes and resources, and I will be sending that fact sheet for pickling out to you by email. So you can expect to see that. But then also our National Center for Home Food Preservation is where a lot of state extension offices go to for the latest research. So they've got some great recipes, and they just updated their latest cookbook called So Easy to Preserve. So if you're interested in looking at that, I have copies available at my office, or you can order straight from them. And then Ball Blue Book is a great resource. And then USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning as well. So many great options for you. One thing that I like to mention to people when they're looking for research tested food preservation recipes is just to do a Google search of your recipe that you're looking for plus state extension in the title, and then you'll know it's been research tested. Now, when you are thinking of doing a canning project, it's so important that you estimate time for your required canning project because it's a longer process than other types of food preservation. You really need uninterrupted time and time where you don't have to leave the kitchen for any specific reason because you're right next to the stove. You're using all of your senses to, see what the process is and to understand where you are in that process. And it does just take more time and energy. And so having that time blocked out really will affect the overall experience that you have and the overall outcome, I think, of the product that you're creating for your home storage or for gifts and that kind of thing. If you've not thought about gifting canned goods, I highly recommend it. Something like that in a little gift bag at Christmas time always is such a delightful thing to give and to receive. So when you are choosing the kinds of produce that you're going to use for preserved food, we always recommend that you're using fruits and vegetables that are as fresh as possible, that are tender, that have just the right texture, that they don't have any kind of blemishes on them, because you're preserving your life, making it last longer. You're controlling for microorganisms, for growth. You don't want to give your product any opportunity for that to grow. So while it may be great for something like cooking with, cutting off bad spots, reducing food waste, that really is just not the best thing for preservation of food, okay? Now, specifically talking about cucumbers, we do recommend that you're using unwaxed cucumbers. And there are a lot of varieties of cucumbers for pickling that are available that are really great because of the size specifically. The larger you get with cucumbers, the more tricky it can be with getting a good final product, a good crunch, those kinds of things that we all love in a good pickle, right? So the smaller ones are the best ones. And removing that 1/16 of an inch of blossom end, where the blossom is, that is important because that part of the cucumber contains enzymes that often will soften pickles. And that can result in a really mushy, just unappealing final product. And a lot of times when we get questions about that, that part of the cucumber is left on. And most often that's the issue that caused that softness. So keep that in mind as well. There's actually an entire guide that we have, an extension of things that can go wrong with pickles. And so if you call in with a question, we can often identify what the issue was so we can help you for the future. So I mentioned this before, but with vinegar, make sure that it's 5% acidity. You can absolutely use white vinegar. That's probably the most common for people, but cider vinegar is also a great option. You've got good flavor, you've got good aroma. The only thing with that is you will get a darker color, right? And so when you think about what the pickle looks like in the jar, if you want to gift it, just, really the overall appeal of it, just consider that. So what color do you want it? That's the same thing with wine vinegars and malt vinegars. They can be safe to use with 5% acidity, but overall, that final product look is going to be altered, okay? And that also goes for sugar. So if you're using a different kind of sugar, besides just white granulated, it can also darken that brine. Now, I mentioned this previously, but if you are wanting to do that sugar substitute, make sure you're following a developed recipe specifically for that and not making those adjustments on your own. Now, This has been interesting this year because apparently there's been a shortage, along with a lot of other things, of pickling or canning salt. We do recommend using these kinds of salt because if you're using something like table salt, you are going to have a poor quality product at the end because the iodine and anti-caking agents in table salt will cloud the pickling liquid. And then with fermentation, if you're going to do like a fermented pickle, it can interfere with fermentation also. If you can't find pickling or canning salt, something you can also use is sea salt or kosher salt, which is also called flake salt. But you need to make sure that you're substituting it on a weight basis. So the way that I like to think about that is think of a very fine sea salt and how much sea salt could fit into like a tablespoon or a half a cup if you want to think in a larger measurement. You're going to fit a lot more sea salt into a tablespoon because of how fine it is. More of it will fit in that tablespoon versus a tablespoon of like flake salt or coarse salt, because those grains are bigger, the granules are larger in size. Less of that is going to fit because there's not as much room for more of them to fit in that small tablespoon size. Okay, so you're going to need to weigh that out. Now, fresh whole spices are really great to use in pickled products, and you're going to get just a much better look and a better, I think, flavor overall. But use them to suit it to your taste. If you are growing dill, you know that it's probably going crazy right now. And so the best recommended method to get dill is to pick it as soon as those flowers begin to open. And you're just going to get the most beautiful flavor and the most beautiful color that way. However, you can absolutely use dill seed. Just know that it's not going to have quite the same flavor that you would get if you were using fresh dill. And then take a look at this picture. Maybe you've come across this before with someone you know or that you've done, or any pickling that you've done, but garlic can turn blue or green. And if you see that, it's most likely because it wasn't cured. So if you're using fresh garlic from your garden now and it didn't have time to cure and to dry out, this can be something that you'll see. It's not a food safety issue. It's still safe to eat, but you can see that's kind of a little bit shocking to your eyes. You may not want to eat it, or it may just not look very good. But using cured garlic will help you with that issue. And then minced garlic may also be a good substitute if you don't want to use fresh garlic. Okay. Last night in class, we had everyone so excited about garlic, and we were putting in more garlic than the recipe called for because they were excited to eat that pickled garlic in addition to the asparagus that we made. So that was a lot of fun. So some recipes will call for firming or crisping agents. You can use those. Those are available to you. However, it's unnecessary to do that if you're using the best, the freshest, the best quality pickles that you can find, and also the most up-to-date methods of canning and pickling. So just keep that in mind. There are some other ingredients that you can use in canning listed here. So you see calcium, calcium chloride, and lime. Those are a little bit trickier. Those are available to you. It's just not a really good starting point for making pickles. I would say those take a lot more patience and more willingness to do some experimenting to get really comfortable with those methods. So if you're interested, I know there's more information available out there to you. Some people have used grape leaves as well, but often grape leaves were used to make a crisper pickle, but we've actually found over time and in research that they actually contribute to a bitter flavor in the pickle, and that they can soften them up actually. So it's interesting that over time we have understood some advances in food preservation techniques. So water can also affect your pickle. So it's important to know that if you do have hard water, that you can either boil the water for 15 minutes, let it sit for 24 hours. You can remove the scum, leaving any sediment out of the process, or you can just use distilled water or the tap water that we have, or even filtered water for best for pickling. So think about that. So water is an important ingredient as well. So, but adding oil isn't recommended unless it's specifically called for in a recipe. And often recipes that do have oil in them will only call for a very small amount. And that's because if a canned good has oil in it, it will affect the shelf life. It'll be a little bit shorter than other types of products. And so it's not a common ingredient. So just be aware of that if you see that in a recipe. Now, when you are thinking of different types of recipes that are available to you and what kind of product you want to make, there is a term called hot pack and raw pack. And hot pack is really just a food that's brought to a boil. It's simmered for 3 to 5 minutes, and then it's hot packed in a jar. So think about one of the recipes that we had last night for sampling was a sweet pickle relish. So that required boiling, I think even for something like 15 minutes. Or if you think of like a salsa, which again is a pickle because it has vinegar in it, you don't generally just make a raw salsa and then put it in a jar. You generally will cook it down for a little bit. Now, why is that? When you cook a product, even think about when you're cooking at home, when you cook something down and you heat it up, it softens, right? And so you'll actually be able to put more food in the jar if it's cooked down a little bit. You'll get less oxygen in the vegetable tissue, so you might get better color and nutrient retention. And then it says here, you can see it's less likely to float in brine. So what that means is when you have more product in a jar and it's packed a little bit tighter, you're not going to have shrinkage of the vegetables versus, I'll move forward here for you, a raw pack. So think about just packing a vegetable into a jar, pouring a brine over the top of it. Once it goes into the canner, then the vegetable starts to cook and it starts to soften. And what happens is, because of that shrinkage, the fruit actually may float a little bit. So you'll have a little bit of a gap underneath that's just brine with the floating product, the floating product. And it's just as safe to eat. It's just as beautiful. Some people prefer a hot pack because they can fit more into the jar and there's less floating, okay? So just a few different things to consider. Okay. So now we're at the stage of water bath canning. So you've selected your recipe, you've selected your ingredients, you know what you're going to do next. The next is to really start by assembling your canning equipment. So right here, I've got a picture of a really great basic canning setup. So you've got a water bath canner. It's got a pot on it. Something that's important to mention is that if you don't have a large water bath canner, you can absolutely use a pot with a lid that's large enough. What you need, though, is a pot that is large enough that will hold your jars and an additional at least 1 or 2 inches of water covering the top of the jars. That's a requirement so that you have the right atmosphere, the right level of water in your water bath canner, okay? And then you also need to have some kind of a rack inside of the bottom of it, because you don't want to set your jars just into an empty pot. You need to have some sort of separation between the jar and the bottom of that pot. So again, you can use all kinds of different things. Maybe use a trivet, or you can see here the metal bands. You can tie some of those together and make a trivet out of those to make that separation from that jar to the pot, okay? You can also see you need to gather your jars, you need to gather your lids, a bubble freer, a funnel, a kitchen timer, a kitchen towel, and other general food preparation equipment. So things like a ladle and things like that. So you don't want to take a hot jar, out of a water bath canner and put it on a cold countertop. So having like a cooling rack or a kitchen towel is a really great way to protect your jars from going from super hot to super cold. Okay. Now, I'm just going to walk you through the steps of water bath canning pickles. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do with your water bath canner is fill it halfway with hot water. You want to cover that and preheat it to 140 degrees for raw packed food or 180 for hot packed. So that looks just something like a very light simmer or a more like a medium simmer. Okay. And you, depending on the recipe, you can do that temperature change. So I have used a water bath canner for my stovetop in classes. And actually last night we used an electric water bath canner, which is wonderful. You just you plug it in and then it has the temperature setting that actually gives you these temperature controls. The problem with electric water bath canners, though, is they are much larger than what you would use on your stovetop. And so they can take a lot longer to heat up and to cool down. So just prepare for that extra time. Okay. So for hot pack jars, if you've got a recipe that you're going to be heating up, you do need to preheat your jars so that you're not putting a hot recipe or like a hot salsa into a cold canning jar. So you can do that a couple different ways. You can put that in your water bath canner that's halfway full and simmer those until you're ready to use the jars, or you can use a clean, emptied dishwasher and run a cycle with it and then keep it closed and keep those warm. Okay. Now you also need some canning lids. I do want to mention that the canning lids have changed over the past 5 years or so, and you no longer need to keep those lids simmering off to the side and hot and ready to use because the manufacturers that are out there that have been in the business for a long time have changed those lids and the material that they use. And so all you need to do now is just wash a soapy water, rinse them off, and have them ready to go for canning. Now, we don't recommend using lids that are more than 5 years old because that product can dry out and you need a really good soft seal. So even if you have old ones, you say, well, maybe I should simmer those old ones. We just recommend that you don't use them past 5 years old. But the new jars, lids, should have on those boxes the recommendations that show you don't have to boil them anymore. So just follow the directions on your lid container. Okay. So you've got your recipe going on your stovetop, you've got your water bath canner going on your stovetop, and when your recipe is ready to go, you take out your jars one at a time out of the water bath canner, putting it on a kitchen towel or a cooling rack, and then you fill your jars one at a time, and then you're going to leave the appropriate headspace for your recipe. So here is a great photo of what headspace is. And you're measuring it from the top of the rim of the jar to the top of the food, okay? So for instance, some recipes may call for filling up your jar 1/2 inch to the top with your food, and then a 1/2 inch of brine. Or if you're doing something like salsa, it would just be 1/2 inch, okay? Now the headspace differs, and it really depends on the type of food, the density of the product, the pack style, and the processing time. So to create that vacuum seal that's so important in home canning, you need to make sure that you've given your food enough space that it can move around and that it can also vent your jar and create that vacuum seal. Okay, so we also do that by the next step is removing any sort of air bubbles that you have in your jar by using a sliding rubber spatula or a bubble freer. And you just stick that in the jar a few times and move it around a few times. And then that allows some of the air bubbles to come out. And then you'll want to wipe your jar rim and the threads using a damp cloth or a paper towel to remove any food residue that could affect that seal when it's in the canner, okay? And now the next step is to put that lid on your jar and then apply your band until it's just fingertip tight. Now, the way that I like to describe that is you use the strength of your fingers and not the strength of your hand. So you put the band on until you just meet some resistance. And then what I do is I actually put the jar on the countertop and just turn it so the jar itself is turning. And then that is as fingertip tight as you should go. If the ring is too loose, liquid is going to escape from the jar during processing, and then the product is going to go down, your seals may fail, and then you can have product floating around in your water. If the rings are too tight, the air can't vent during processing, and so the food will discolor during storage, and then over tightening could also cause your lids to buckle and your jars to break. So especially with raw packed foods. So it's just important that you allow some of the air from your product to come out during processing. That will give you a really good a good vacuum seal. Okay. So then once all your jars are filled, your lids are on, your bands are screwed on to the appropriate tightness, then you can pick up your jars with a jar lifter and then put them in your water bath canner. And then just because you've had that lower level, once your jars are full, that water level will most likely go up. If it's not at that 1 or 2 inches, you do need to make sure that you add a little bit of extra boiling water, like a tea kettle onto the side is a really great way to have that ready and available to you. And then add that water. Okay. And then you put your lid on and bring to a full rolling boil. That can take a few minutes to do so, but keep your ear out for that. Maybe just check the lid a few times. Once it's reached a full rolling boil, then you set your timer to begin your processing time. Okay. Your recipe is most likely not going to be adjusted for altitude. So if you're joining from somewhere in Colorado, know that anywhere you live in Colorado is considered a higher altitude, okay? And that you need to make an adjustment. So you can see here, this is an altitude chart from Ball Corporation, and they have an altitude chart for boiling water processing. Now, what you need to know is that you need to add time in a recipe because we have lower boiling points of water at altitude. With pressure canning, there's a different chart because what you need to do instead of adding time is you need to add pressure. And that's because we have lower atmospheric pressure at altitude. So there's less pressure pushing down on us. And so things you think about like baking, that's why things rise and then they collapse, is that pressure isn't pressing against. So use this chart. If you're using any Colorado State University recipes, that adjustment will already be made for you. And so you will see a perfect chart listing where you are at altitude. You'll never have to question it. If you're using a non-CSU recipe, then you'll need to use this chart so that you can know that you're adding the appropriate amount of time. Okay. So after your processing time, the timer goes off. You need to turn off the heat, remove the lid, and wait 5 minutes before you pull those jars out. And waiting that 5 minutes actually helps with the vacuum seal. So you're letting it just sit for a few minutes. Once that 5-minute timer has gone off, then you remove the jars from the canner, again, without tilting because you don't want to affect that vacuum seal. And then you can set it upright on a towel, a cooling rack, or a cutting board to prevent jar breakage. Okay. And something else with that 5-minute time is that also will helps to reduce the risk of siphoning. And siphoning is when you pull something directly out of the jar or out of the water bath canner onto your countertop. That exchange in heat, or that change in heat, can actually cause some of the product to come out of the jar. And so that 5 minutes really is just so important. And then the next step is really the trickiest part, and that's leaving your jars undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. They really need that time to set that seal and to be undisturbed. Once that happens, then you can check the lids for sealing by pressing the middle of that lid It shouldn't spring up. The lid should be concave, so you can hold that lid up and take a look at it. And then once that's done, then you can remove those screw bands. The screw bands, because of the water boiling, may get a little loose. We don't need to retighten those. And actually what you're going to do is you are going to remove those screw bands. They're not necessary during storage, and we actually recommend not using them in storage, because if you've had any kind of residue between the band and the jar, that can become moldy over time. If you've got extra water in there, that can rust those bands over time. It's just not necessary to keep those. And what's nice is that you can reuse those bands over and over, and anytime until they're a product, or until the quality of those starts to deteriorate. So if they get bent or they get nicked or they get rusty, then you'll want to discard them and use new ones. Okay. In the boiling water, you also might get a little bit of residue on the outsides of the jars because some product is coming out. So you just want to wash your jar, make it nice and clean, and then label your with contents with the date, and then store in a cool, dry, dark place. Okay. The best quality that you're going to get from your home canned food is within a year. Beyond the year, it's going to start deteriorating a little bit. So it's really just best to eat it within that limit. It's not going to go bad immediately, but within that year is just the best recommendation. The quality will start to change. As I mentioned before, with that classic cucumber pickle, there are some issues that come up that are pretty, I would say, common. And so if you do have pickling problems, you can give our Master Food Safety Advisors a call and ask for specific questions. You can also email me, and I have my information here on this slide, but you've got an email from me already, and you will be able to access that information. So do let me know if anything comes up. I'm happy to answer those questions for you. So we are at the end of the slideshow. So I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to check on the chat and answer those questions that have come in. Okay. So, and again, I did want to remind you, I will be sending you resources to you by email, some fact sheets and the presentation itself. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. And so I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we'll take time for questions. So again, thank you for joining. If you need to go, that's totally fine. I am available to you if you have questions in the future. Thank you so much.